Welcome to Nole, the official podcast of the College of Arts and Sciences at Florida State University. I'm your host, Amy Walden, and today we welcome Eric Shattuck, an assistant professor and biological anthropologist in the FSU Department of Anthropology and an affiliated faculty member at FSU's Native American and Indigenous Studies Center. Eric, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Oh, thanks so much for the invitation.
So on today's episode, we're diving into the world of biological anthropology and the role that it plays in better understanding health, sickness behavior, immune function, and much more. So Eric, we'd love to learn a little bit more about you. How did you first become interested in anthropology and ultimately biological anthropology?
Absolutely. So had a family member, my aunt actually, who was in college. I had seen her kind of switch majors a lot. Somehow got it in my head that when I went to college, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to kind of have a really focused approach and kind of get in and get out, of course, enjoy myself. So I took a year off between finishing high school and then starting university. I went to the University of Georgia for my undergraduate. And I came across a book called Ishmael by Daniel Quinn, kind of a really inspiring philosophical take on, what it is to kind of be human. And it really just kind of spoke to me and gripped me and kind of led me down this path that led me to this discipline, this field called anthropology, study of humans. I decided that's what I really want to do. I was really interested in, and still am, of course, in cultural differences around the world. I graduated, I had this path of working along those lines, and then again took time between undergraduate and graduate. I went back to the books and went back to everything that I'd read in undergraduate and found that the cultural anthropology stuff, the water access rights, resource rights is absolutely fascinating. But what's really gripping me now is honestly more of this biological anthropology, these ideas about evolution and evolutionary medicine, how we can apply evolutionary theory to questions about health, wellness. That kind of sparked in me this kind of pivot to biological anthropology, which, as they say, the rest is history. I went on for my master's and then PhD, and now I'm here.
Awesome. Well, we are so glad that you're here now at
Thanks.
FSU. The FSU Department of Anthropology has three primary subdisciplines: archaeology, cultural anthropology, and your area, biological anthropology. So for anyone listening who is unfamiliar with biological anthropology specifically, can you explain a little bit about what it is and some of the real-world problems that researchers in the field are working to understand?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said, anthropology is the study of people. Anywhere in the world, anything about them, it's a very, very broad kind of open playing field for these kinds of questions. Biological anthropology kind of subsumes a number of different, even kind of subdisciplines within that. So in biological anthropology, we have folks like myself who do a little bit more what we might call human biology. So we work with living populations like I do. And we ask questions about again, in my case, health and things like this, however we're measuring or thinking about health. Anthropology, as kind of a quick aside, is a very comparative field. So very often we have data from different places around the world, different cultures, different societies, different socioeconomic backgrounds that we work to kind of compare and understand how people vary, how they survive, thrive in different environments. Also within biological anthropology, we have primatology. So those who work with non-human primates. We have folks working on primate evolution or human evolution and many, many more things besides. But I think I'll probably get yelled at if I've forgotten any by my colleagues. But those are kind of the divisions within kind of biological anthropology. The second part of your question was what kinds of real world questions and problems are they working on? That's a fantastic question. I was thinking about that. We have people like myself and others who work again on questions of health. This is kind of a comparative field, so we want to understand how people's health varies across different contexts. How do social contexts get under the skin, as the saying goes, and influence health, inflammation, immune function, stress physiology, and things like that. Folks work on questions of One Health, human, animal, and environment interactions and how the health of one influences the health of the other. Folks work with infectious disease. I have a colleague, for instance, less so on the infectious disease side, but she works with refugee populations. And again, understanding how those refugee experiences influence health, right? Very often for the worst. I think that's really where I see biological anthropology right now, at least for my little corner of human biology, is really trying to understand with everything going on in the world, changing environments, changing political contexts and things like this. How are humans experiencing this? How is this affecting our biology and our health?
Yeah, and it seems like there's always some kind of new event that's come along that kind of can impact your field, some new disease that we're talking about in headlines and things like that. You joined the FSU faculty in 2023 and you lead the Shire Lab, an acronym for Social Health and Immunology Research Lab on campus. Can you tell us about the kinds of research that your lab is working on there?
Yeah, so I'm really proud of the lab. I'm really proud of the students that have joined. We have about a dozen undergraduate students in there right now, and they're helping me with a number of different projects that I have kind of ongoing. So I think we'll talk a little bit later about the project in Mexico, but we have data from three sort of field seasons there that they're helping me sort of clean up and sort through, not only quantitative data, survey data, but now also we're starting to tackle the interview data that we have. We have some colleagues outside of FSU. For instance, my friend and colleague Chris Lynn at Bama. I had to give him a lot of teasing when FSU beat Bama earlier in the season. But he has a project that I'm on as well. Some of the Shire students are working with on geophagy, so why people eat dirt, not just any kind of dirt, special clays and things like this. Then we also have students who have proposed their own research projects. We have a student, an undergraduate, who's doing her honors in the major thesis on known or suspected infertility in college-age women and how that may influence their kind of life goals. You know, at this time when they're in college, they're setting these life goals, and a diagnosis like this may influence what they decide to do, what kinds of career paths, you know, if fertility treatments become a possibility, you know, gosh, those can be really expensive. So do they shift their planning in that regard? There's another student who is doing, again, an honors in the major project on patients with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease and end-of-life decisions and hospice care. A lot of different questions are being explored in the lab, not only my own, but then those of the students as well.
It's great. Follow the Shire Lab on Instagram if you haven't already. So in 2024, you were part of a team to receive a $3.4 million grant from the National Institutes of Health to conduct a 5-year investigation into how patients seeking care might be treated differently when the providers themselves are sick or fearful of becoming sick. Some members of the FSU Department of Psychology were also part of the team. Can you tell us more about how this project first came about?
Sure. Actually, so the project is being led by an FSU alum. Stacy Mahanova, she's at the University of Arkansas. She graduated with her PhD in psychology. And I suppose it's one of those small world kind of things. I met Stacy online during the pandemic as part of a writing group through one of the societies we both belong to, just as a way to kind of make connections for early career researchers at a time when, you know, obviously people weren't really traveling, going to conferences. This project idea we worked on it together with, of course, input from all of our other collaborators. And after a few rounds of submissions and revisions, we were lucky enough to be awarded that sum by the NIH. FSU is a subcontract to that. So I'm kind of not only part of the main team, but then also with my colleagues over in psychology, John and Ashby, we're working as kind of a subcontract to help steer that grant. So we have data coming in from these 2 years of data collection. We're working on a few things already to try to get some products together, really preliminary reports. But the team is absolutely fantastic. We've been really productive in getting participants in. And then in the next year or so, we'll be hopefully picking up the second arm of that project, which is much more experimental. So what we're hoping to show over the course of this grant is that sickness, inflammation, or even, as you mentioned earlier, the kind of threat of illness can really impact our behavior in ways that we may not recognize. Now, we're focusing in healthcare professionals, but this could happen to any of us, right? So for instance, there are studies where people have taken sick people, put them in driving simulators, and found that they actually react more slowly to potential accidents and things like that, right? It's that kind of brain fog that we all experience when we get sick. So there's another example of how this can impact our psychology, our behavior in these really, really subtle ways. Healthcare professionals are a really great kind of place to look for this, place to probe these kinds of questions, because we know that, unfortunately, like all of us, they go to work when they're sick. They make decisions, complicated decisions, very often under a lot of pressure, time pressure, and things like this. Very often these decisions are life or death. They're also around sick people, of course, as part of the job. And we know from other studies that those kinds of cues of disease, blood and sneezing and coughing and things like this, can also kind of activate some of these psychological mechanisms or these psychological shortcuts that people may take to make quick decisions under these kinds of pressures. There's also aspects of burnout, right, as kind of these systemic problems in American healthcare and in healthcare systems elsewhere too, of course. But put all of this together, these individuals are under a lot of pressure and are dealing with a lot of other kind of stimuli, inflammation, sickness, these cues of sickness, and so on. And we're hoping to show that this, again, influences their decision-making and may be a potential explanation for why we see health disparities, right? Why some people, when they go to hospitals, are treated a little bit differently than others. I want to emphasize that we're not blaming the physicians for this by any stretch of the imagination, right? These are cues and conditions that we all experience, whether we're hosting podcasts or in the hospital treating patients. Really, we're trying to recognize the impacts of these things on human psychology, on human decision-making. And in the case of healthcare professionals, then maybe make recommendations to healthcare systems, to hospitals, to try to mitigate some of these things.
It's such an interesting question and something I really didn't think about until I was reading about this grant, and makes you wonder even more questions along the way about what this is going to bring up. And we're really interested to see what you guys find out at the end of the study.
Oh, thanks. So are we.
You're also working on research in Jalisco, Mexico, studying how environmental and social conditions affect immune function. Can you tell us more about that research?
Absolutely. So we completed our kind of first wave of data collection. We work there with an indigenous group called the Waradica. They're also called the Huichol. And we're doing a urban and rural comparison of sleep and other markers of health in these indigenous participants. We have two kind of field sites, big quotes. One is in Guadalajara, which is the second largest city in Mexico. And like any large city, you can imagine there's pollution and noise and light at night and electricity and everything else like this. The more traditional area that we are working in is a rural area about 12 hours by car from Guadalajara. It's entirely different in terms of the context, right? There are homes, absolutely, that have windows and electricity and things like this, but not all of the town is electrified. The building construction is different between the rural area and Guadalajara, different construction materials. And rather than working in construction or with things like that in Guadalajara, the people in the rural areas are working a little bit more with agriculture and things like this. So it's just this really huge difference in lifestyles, right? Diet, exercise, and so on. So as I say, we were looking at differences in sleep. We gave them accelerometers to wear, which are like very kind of expensive Fitbits that measure movement and are very precise. And we have access to the raw data, so we can get in there and really be very precise with it. Whereas commercial devices like Fitbits and so on, it's kind of a black box of an algorithm. We are working on getting our first kind of round of publications together. We have some really interesting findings that we hope to be able to share soon. We have a number of other questions we're asking, including a paper that's in review right now, looking at connectedness to nature, participation in traditional religious ceremonies, and mental and physical health. Many Waradica practice or continue to practice traditional religious ceremonies and engage in traditional religious beliefs. In addition to Catholicism and things like that. And of course, there's a spectrum as to where people may fall in that. It's a key part of identity, right? Being able to practice your beliefs. And we are showing that there's some impacts, not so much on physical health, but on mental health for people who engage in these activities, but then also who view themselves as being really a part of nature. And that's something that is kind of inherent to their traditional worldview, right? That humans are no different than birds and other animals. And so that seems to contribute to better mental health in some people. So really fascinating stuff that we hope to follow up on. You mentioned immune function. We haven't gotten there quite yet. We're hoping to work on that in a future round of data collection. So stay tuned.
Yeah, we'll have to have you back on the podcast for
Absolutely.
updates on all of the projects you have going on. Your area of research, it seems to provide a lot of opportunity for collaboration with other researchers from departments across the university. We mentioned the Department of Psychology, but other institutions around the globe as well. Why is this interdisciplinary approach such an important aspect of your work?
Absolutely. Anthropology is one of those fields, like I said before, we're a really big umbrella. You can ask a lot of questions within anthropology. And as part of that, we also play really well with others, right? Because we share similar methods, we share interests in similar kinds of outcomes. We just have a slightly different way of asking the questions. I think the interdisciplinarity of my work and others as well is really key when we're trying to ask questions about these big topics about health, about evolution and things like that. With any kind of big question like that, any kind of big problem, no one discipline and certainly no one researcher knows everything about it, right? We need help. We need outside perspectives. There's going to be things that we haven't thought of. Every human has some degree of bias, just those blinders that we all have about our own work and so on. And so opening the doors and bringing people in to work with you, to share ideas and collaborate is really, I think, fundamental to anthropology, fundamental to the work I do. And honestly, I think it's the way of science going forward.
So now that we're all fascinated by all of your work, honestly, what do you think is one of the most common misconceptions that people have about your field of research, or something people are surprised to find out maybe when you're telling them about your work?
Sure. I think a lot of times when people think of anthropology, they tend to think of archaeology, right? And anthropology, we have 3 fields here at FSU. There's a 4th field officially that we don't have any representation in our department yet, but that's linguistic anthropology. Or sometimes people think we work with dinosaurs. And I actually had one person too who thought, confused anthropology with entomology and thought we worked with bugs, right? So I think that being such a big field, there's a lot of work that goes on in it, and there's a lot of questions and people working with different groups, and again, people even working with primates and things like this. And so I think sometimes when I say I'm an anthropologist, people, again, they think dinosaurs or they think Indiana Jones. They're surprised maybe to find out that I work with living humans, or they're surprised to find out that I do lab work, that I have a little bit of background training in immunology and endocrinology, that we can work with biological samples. We can ask questions about human physiology and things like that, that maybe they think of as happening more over on the biology or the STEM side of campus.
Absolutely. I think that's 100% true. What would your advice be for students who are interested in starting their journey into anthropology?
Well, I encourage it, and I encourage those students to come knock on our doors, right? If they're here at FSU, or these days we're all connected through social media and email and everything like that. But I think faculty always love talking about their research and just really jump at every chance, whether that's students or podcasts, to talk about what they do. And so don't be afraid. Come knock on our doors. Ask us what we're up to. Send us emails. There's nothing wrong with cold emailing faculty. It's really, really a great field. You can do so much within anthropology. We can give you reading lists of books that help get you kind of oriented to the field and stuff like that. And of course, take our classes. I think anthropology makes a wonderful double major or a minor for people who, again, I'm kind of biased. I'm thinking about health here, but for people who want to go into health and medicine, understanding something about human variation, how cultures and societies and environment, again, kind of get under the skin, influence our biology, I think is tremendous training for future doctors and nurses and healthcare professionals, right? So we're here. Come talk to us.
Awesome. So, Eric, we end every episode of our podcast with our bowl of mystery questions.
Right.
So please draw a question and read it.
All right, let's see what we have. What is your favorite season and why? Oh gosh, I think my favorite season is one of the seasons we don't have here in Florida, and that's fall. There's something about kind of the cooler weather. And I've lived in the South or the Southern United States for a long time. I'm from New Mexico originally. Before moving to Tallahassee, my wife and I lived in San Antonio in Texas. And so don't often get fall, but the cooler weather, the kind of crispness that's in the air, the leaves, the colors, everything about it is just really, it's really wonderful and very rare that I experience it. And so maybe one day we'll do a trip up to New York or something in the fall and get some of that.
See
that
the
great
real
foliage.
colors changing.
Absolutely.
We get a little bit of it in Tallahassee, but definitely not as much as I would like.
Yeah.
Eric, thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast. And if you would like to learn more about Eric Shattuck's research here at the FSU Department of Anthropology, visit anthro.fsu.edu. Thanks for tuning into Knowledge, and we'll catch you next time.